He finds her under a spruce. Burlap, bruises, and a whisper, "He'll kill you." A bell tattles, a nailed-shut well coughs up bones, and Powder Bridge holds in the wind. By dusk, 2 mugs steam on a step. Saddle up. This ride drags fear into daylight. Snow had blown in all night, a dry hiss that cut the ears and made the cottonwoods talk. Eli McCrae rode the fence line at first light, scarf iced stiff, breath turning to smoke. The sorrel's tail was crusted white, wire sang under the wind. Out beyond the last post, a dark knot lay under a leaning spruce, wrong-shaped for a rock or deer. He swung down. The ground was iron. His boot soles squeaked on the crust. Up close, he saw bare feet. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Blue, white, and rigid, and a body wrapped in burlap the color of old feed sacks. Darker where it had drunk blood. Hair stuck out of the cloth in matted ropes. The wind lifted a corner and showed skin the bruised colors a man ought never see. Eli knelt and set his lantern on the snow. The glass was smoked and warm in the palm. He eased a hand to the wrist under the cloth. Cold as creekstone, a twitch came through his own hand, his trigger finger, that old knuckle that locked in deep winter. He had to rub it hard against his coat seam to make it work. "Don't make me come late again," he said, quiet to nobody. The words tasted like iron. The eyes opened in a slit, gray, clouded. She stared not at him, but past him, as if the world she feared was still walking up the draw. Her lips cracked when she moved them. "He'll kill you," she said, a whisper thin as reed grass. Just like that. Then the lid slid down and her breath went small again. "Not today," Eli told the air. He lifted the burlap's edge just enough to see where the blood came from. He didn't count the hurts. Counting had a way of turning a person into a ledger. He tucked at the cloth back, snug as he could. The smell of burlap and old grain and something coppery hung around them. He stood, looked out across the pale country, and saw a sign. 3 sets of hoof prints scoured long by the wind, not neat tracks, but a dragged scuffle, angling off the ridge toward Virgil Tate's big spread. The sorrel flinched when Eli hefted the woman into the saddle. She was light, but dead weight is never easy. He swung up behind, set her against him so her head found the hollow of his breastbone. He drew his coat over both of them and turned for home, keeping to the lee of the brush rows where the snow wasn't as deep. The saddle leather creaked. The horse huffed, steam rising. The woman's feet banged his thigh with each step, a dull knock that made him want to hurry and not jar her at once. The cabin sat with its back to a windbreak of spruce and tamarack. Smoke lifted straight a little way and then smeared east. Eli slid down, took her again in both arms, and shouldered through the door. The room hit him with the smell of cold ashes and iron. He laid her on the spare bed that had been a gear bench since summer. His wife's quilt, folded for 6 winters, came to his hand without him thinking. He stopped. The finger in his right hand had gone rigid again, a small insult, old and mean. He worked it loose and spread the quilt over the burlap, careful. Her breathing rattled once, then steadied. He touched 2 fingers to the pulse he had found. Still there? He set water on the stove and fed kindling under the belly of the iron box until it ticked and woke. The first heat in a cold stove is like a promise. He stood with his hands on the lid, palms stinging back to life. "Not today," he said again, to the room this time. Outside, a gust slapped the lean-to door and sent a ribbon of snow across the threshold. Eli went back out for his lantern and held it low along the churned path he'd made. The wind had already started to heal his tracks. Even so, the lantern showed what he knew he'd find. Small, dark dots, pin-fine at first, spattering heavier near the spruce. He crouched and lifted the globe to the snow's skin. The light caught the red like garnets scattered thin. He turned and looked toward the south, where Tate's land ran fat along the river. Nothing moved out there but wind. He shut the door gentle on the night and slid the bar into its iron brackets. The bar had belonged to another winter, another hurry, and he felt that old year tug at him the way a river tugs at a boot. "Not this time," he said, and the stove answered with a soft pop as if to agree. In the cabin's warm edge, he stripped off his gloves and checked her breath again. The burlap rasped under his hand. Her hair smelled of sweat and dust and horse. He poured a cup from the kettle and held it near his face to thaw his lip. Snow hissed on the stovetop and died. Somewhere out in the yard, a hinge sang a thin note and quit. Eli blew the lantern lower and set it on the floor by the bed. Lantern light wobbled over the plank wall, and the photo that still hung there, a sun-faded woman with a closed-mouth smile and a dress she'd sewn herself. The glass was cracked across the corner. Eli did not look long. He pulled a chair to the bed, the old rocker with a split runner he kept meaning to mend, and set his hat on his knee. The wind leaned on the house. The woman slept or fell into something like it. Eli watched the slow lift of the quilt. He listened for hooves and heard only the stove and his own blood working. After a time, he rose to check the latch on the back door. The bar sat true. He raised the lantern one more time to the window and saw the trail he had made from the tree, a pale scar in the blown snow. Along it, dot by dot, the red still showed where the light caught it, bright as fallen stars. The stove took hold, slow iron ticking as frost left it, then breathed steady like a big animal bedded for the night. Eli set a kettle on and shaved soap into a pan. Steam lifted sweet as hay when you first cut it. He slit the burlap with his pocket knife and eased it back from the woman's shoulders. The cloth rasped like sand on oak. He kept his eyes where decency said they ought to be. Bruises showed in mean colors along the ribs and collarbone, old and new, fighting for space. He dripped warm water on a cloth, wrung it out, and washed away grit and blood until skin came clean in spots. Sheep tallow softened the splits at her mouth and hands. The smell of it ran under the stove's heat. Her lashes fluttered. Gray eyes opened and tried to find the room. When the air hit her throat, she winced and turned her head. Don't send for the town doctor," she got out, voice like paper. "He drinks with Tate." "Patches what Tate breaks." "I didn't figure to," Eli said. He ladled water over the cloth again, kept his voice small as the fire. "You're safe for now? That's what I got to offer?" He crossed to the cedar chest against the far wall. The lid stuck, then gave with a dry sigh. Inside lay a wool dress, brown with a bit of faded blue at the cuffs, folded careful 6 winters running. His hand stalled over it. The stiff finger in his right hand locked as if the cold lived inside that one joint. He worked it with his left thumb until it bent. "Not late, not this time," he said without sound, and brought the dress to the bed. "This belonged to my wife," he told the woman. "It's clean. You can have it if you want it. I'll step outside while you fix yourself." He laid the dress near her shoulder and set a tin cup on the table. "Sip slow." She looked at the dress like you look at a door you're not sure will open. After a breath, she nodded. He turned his back and went to the stove. The kettle churred. He threw a pinch of salt into a pot and broke a bone into it, a knuckle he'd meant for stew. Onion followed. The pot gave up a good smell that climbed and filled the cold corners. Wind shouldered the house again. Something banged the back entry. Eli crossed the kitchen and threw the latch, brought the door in against the push. A length of chain hung from a nail by the jamb, old gate chain, its lower links stained dark from summer mud that no winter had scoured off. He frowned. On the step, half tucked under drifted snow, lay a paper twist from Bull Durham, flattened where a heel had found it, as Tate's hands rolled those little cigarettes and spit the shreds when they talked. He pinched the paper free and turned it in his fingers. then slid it into a tobacco tin on the shelf instead of the stove. "Leave a trail if they want to," he said. Back at the table, he dipped broth. The spoon rattled against the cup when he lifted it. His hand's small tremor, that stubborn finger asking for heat and time. He set the spoon down, wrapped his palm around the cup, and breathed slow till the shake went out of it. He carried the cup over. She'd worked herself into the dress, clumsy but done, the wool too big at the shoulders and honest all the same. She held the quilt high with one hand. Her eyes were clearer, pain finding its seat instead of running wild. "May?" she said, as if answering a question he hadn't asked. "Eli," he said back. He touched the cup to her fingers. "Sip." She did, small, careful sips that put color under her skin. The tallow had glossed her split lip. The heat of the broth eased the tight in her jaw. She glanced toward the door as if the wind carried boots with it. "You don't know what he is," she whispered. I know enough." Eli set the cup down and tucked the quilt around her shoulders. "And I know this house." Her eyes moved to the wall and found the faded photograph without him showing it. "She your wife?" She was. The word set down like a stone in a creek, where water could wash it, but not change it. He pulled the rocker nearer and sat. The stove hummed and the pot spoke in quiet bubbles. Somewhere a hinge in the lean-to sang one high, thin note, then fell silent. "Door won't hold if he wants it," May said after a time, voice hoarse but steadying. "The door's got a bar," Eli said, "and I've got more than that." He didn't name the rifle over the mantel or the men in town who still knew right from easy. He could feel the hoof sign written out on the white country dragging toward Tate's fat river ground. He could feel the chain by the door, the paper twist in his tin, the old winter in his finger. He set his palm over the stove lid again until the skin prickled hard. Heat climbed his arm and loosened what cold had taken. "Rest," he said. "Wind will talk, but it can't get in." She watched him for another breath, then let her eyes shut. He sat and listened to the small sounds a body makes when it has decided for a while to live. The kettle hissed and the snow slid soft from the roof. Eli looked once more at the chain by the door, dulled by summer mud, and at the tin he had tucked the Durham paper into. He left both where they were. The night could do its worst and say its piece. He would be here to hear it. Morning came hard and gray, the kind that flattens sound. Eli banked the stove, checked the bar on the back door, and set the tin cup where May could reach it. She slept heavy in the wool dress, one hand outside the quilt like she meant to keep what she was given. He wrote 2 words on a scrap and left it on the table. Back soon, then pulled on his coat and stepped into the tight cold. The sorrel's breath made white ropes that drifted off and died. Iron rang under hoof as they hit the packed trace to town. Fences wore little beards of rime. Far to the south, a low smear of smoke said Tate's chimneys were pulling hard. Eli kept his eyes forward and his hand deep in his coat pocket, working the stubborn finger until it would bend. Powder River crossing held to winter like an old woman holds to a shawl, close and stiff. The forge at Diego Morales's place was the first sign of heat that didn't belong to God. The mouth of it glowed a steady orange, the chimney giving a fat blue thread that froze and broke in the air. Inside, the sparks leapt when Diego's hammer met iron, and that bell's sweet ring walked the rafters. Diego looked up from a shoe he was shaping. He had a face cut by wind, black hair roped back, and hands that made truth out of bent metal. "You look like a fence post," he said. "Come thaw." Eli stood where the heat licked his shins and felt the ache let go of his knuckles. "Need your ear more than your iron." Diego set the shoe aside, let the hammer rest. "All right." 3 sets of sign dragged along my north fence, Eli said. burlap and blood at the spruce. She told me not to call the town doctor. Diego's mouth tightened like he'd taken a mouthful of green persimmon. Tate saw bones. Patches what Tate breaks. He wiped sweat with the back of his wrist. You hear about Jesse Lane last summer? I was on the high pasture with the ewes. Boy worked for Tate. 16. Quiet. He was there one supper, gone before sunup. No bedroll taken. Miss Hattie said she heard a wagon roll late, wheels wrapped with something to muffle, like men do when they mean to pass a sleeping town. Diego's eyes slid to the door, then back. Nobody asked too loud. Folks liked their fences uncut. Footsteps scuffed behind them. Amos Pike hunched in the doorway, all elbows and worry, hat-pin eyes darting. A good man when the world was gentle. You boys best leave Virgil's name out your mouths, he said. Not mean, just scared. I got winter pasture under his say-so. Diego's jaw worked. Eli didn't answer Amos so much as look through him, past him, to where choices live before they're spoken. You hear anything else? He asked Diego. Sam's in from the tongue, Diego said. Been trapping sign over Tate's way. He's got eyes that see through snow like glass. Go ask him. They stepped into the day, and the cold bit the sweat right off Diego's face. Sam Rivers leaned against this forge wall out of the wind, a wool blanket thrown just so, eyes the color of slate. He nodded once, the way a man does when hello is already understood. Eli said, I need what you know. Sam tipped his chin south. Tate's old well, boarded since the dry years. Nail heads bright as a dime. New lock, mud on the boards that's not from this week. He spoke soft, like wind in short grass. Hoof sign says 3. One horse dragging more than its share. The prints cross each other wrong, like men look back when they should have looked where they were going. Could be nothing, Amos put in, from where he'd followed without meaning to. Could be they shored the old thing. Folks do. Sam's mouth barely moved. Men who shore a well don't walk like that. Miss Hattie Garner blew in on a draft, arms full of brown paper and steam. She ran the store the way a general runs a campaign, and she brought coffee strong enough to make a saint confess. Lord save me from hearing you fools whisper in a blacksmith shop, she said, setting tin cups down. I heard a wagon night Jesse went, woke me out of a hard sleep. Canvas over something heavy. Nobody drives that slow unless they don't want to clatter, and I'm not afraid of saying so, where ears can carry it. Amos looked at his boots. He didn't leave. Diego pushed a cup at Eli. The coffee hurt good going down. Eli set it aside without finishing. Cyrus Bell? He asked. Miss Hattie sniffed. Sheriff's at his desk counting cartridges. He's slow like winter, but he gets places in his own time. You put it in his book. He'll tote it proper. Eli thought of the chain by his door, summer mud still clinging, thought of the twist of Durham paper in his tin, thought of a boy's name he hadn't known yesterday. I came too late. The old words moved in him and found no purchase. He shook his hand once, hard, and the finger answered. I'll speak to Cyrus, he said. Sam, can you walk the edge with me this afternoon? Not the well, not yet. Just close enough to smell what's been done. Sam eyed him, measuring the part of a man no tailor can cut. He nodded again. Light will be right about sundown. Then that's when, Eli said. Miss Hattie slid a small sack across the anvil. Bread and fatback. Don't argue. Her eyes, sharp as fresh split cedar, softened a fraction. You mind that back door, Eli. I will, he said. He rode out with the sorrel stepping neat, coffee heat in his belly, and iron talk in his ear. The country between town and his place wore wind like a skin. When he topped the last rise, he reined in and let the land tell him what it would. Smoke rose clean from Palmarson's chimney. No fresh tracks on the yard but his. He breathed once, long, and let it out where the frost could have it. He swung down by the empty shed to fetch kindling, and saw it then, along the trough's rim, where the sun had licked a thin edge, free a rime, a brown smear that wasn't rust. It had dried in a ragged run and left a whisper of color, mimar in the grain. Old blood turned to iron stain. No cow had bled there. He set his palm to the wood, feeling how cold can live inside a thing long after the fire's gone, and lifted his head to listen. The place was quiet as a held breath. Far off, a crow talked once and then thought better of it. Eli stood still until the wind came back and remembered how to move. By noon the sky had gone the flat white that makes a man squint. The wind rested, every sound stood alone. Eli split kindling on the block by the shed, and listened to the quiet listen back. From far off came the steady thud of hooves on frozen ground, 3 beats and a leg, like a lame man trying to keep time. They came up his lane without slowing. Virgil Tate rode center on a rangy bay with a brass concho bridle, 2 hands flanking him, like burrs on a pant cuff. Hats low, coats open to show they weren't afraid of the air or anything in it. Virgil didn't ride to the hitch. He pulled up to the porch as if any front step in the county was his. Eli set the axe down and wiped both palms on his pants. The right hand's trigger finger tried to lock from the cold. He pushed it straight against his thigh until the joint found sense. He stepped to the yard and let the door stay closed behind him. Virgil swung one leg over and dropped, reins loose. He had a face built for winning arguments by standing closer than he needed to. "Afternoon, McCrae." He didn't wait for an answer. His eyes were already past Eli to the door. "I'll be taking my wife." "She's inside," Eli said. "She's breathing easier." "That's on me. What happens to her from here is on her." Say Virgil smiled without warming. "You've had your good deed. Now stand aside." The hand on Virgil's right, a thick fellow with a stitched ear, shifted in his saddle. The other one worked the bit so his horse clinked. They liked the sound of it. The door latch clicked behind Eli. The wool dress made a straight line down May's frame, too big in the shoulders, decent all the same. She had color now where there'd been none. She put one hand on the pump like a woman testing a step. "I'm not going with you," she said. Her voice was hoarse, but it didn't wobble. Virgil's smile dropped its manners. He stepped up the 2 porch boards, quick, hand-reaching. He was faster than a man his size ought to be, used to getting there first and making that the rule. His fingers closed on the sleeve at May's upper arm. Eli moved before the old thought, "I came too late," had a chance to stand up. He didn't go for the rifle in the rack inside or the handgun under the coat peg. He put his left palm high on Virgil's elbow, brought the right up under the man's hand, and turned through the wrist like he was rolling a stubborn wire staple out of cedar. The joint talked, soft and ugly. Virgil's shoulders followed his hand, whether they cared to or not. Eli stepped, kept the torque, and set Virgil's knuckles against the doorpost without breaking skin. The bay danced, iron clinking. The 2 hands froze just long enough to see what new thing this was. "Let go of her," Eli said. His voice wasn't loud. "Now." May pulled free and stepped back into shadow. Virgil tried to drive through the pain. Eli leaned a notch, and the man's knees remembered gravity. When he had Virgil on his heels, Eli let the wrist go. The big man stumbled, caught himself, and turned with his face wrong-colored from rage and hurt. For one jump of the heart, he looked as if he might be a fool and try a gun. His boys read the same thought and didn't love it. Along the fence line, the world had grown eyes. Diego Morales stood with a hammer still in his fist, the head black with use. Miss Hattie had come without her apron, which told you how fast she'd walked. Her chin was high and set. 2 other small ranchers stood half behind posts like they weren't sure if seeing counted as taking sides. Amos Pike hovered back of them, hat brim low, but he hadn't gone. Virgil saw them. He rolled his wrist, found where it still worked, and scraped spit into the yard. "You made a picture for these good people," he said. "You think they'll hang it on their walls when I'm done?" "See who's standing where," Miss Hattie said. "Not sweet." Virgil laughed once, short. He pointed at Eli with his good hand. "You just bought yourself a long winter." He tipped his head at May. "You can't hide in this county forever." "She's not hiding," Eli said. "She's deciding." The stitched ear hand shifted his weight. The other one looked past the house toward the back draw, like a man taking a measure. Virgil gathered his reins slow, keeping his eyes on Eli as if his stare were a rope. He put a boot to the stirrup and swung up, careful with the sore wrist. "This isn't settled," he said. "It will be," Eli answered. They turned their horses. Snow squeaked under steel. As the bay sidled near the granary, the stitched ear hand reached to steady himself and lost something. His right glove tumbled, a heavy thing with iron studs stitched over the knuckles. He didn't notice it fall. The glove hit the packed snow with a small thud and lay there, mean as a trap. Eli didn't move to pick it up. He watched their backs shrink to 3 dark marks against the pale that pointed south. The breath came out of him slow. May stood in the doorway, one palm flat where Virgil's hand had been. She looked at the yard like a person memorizing a room in case she had to run in the dark. The wool dress lifted and fell with the wind. Neighbors let go their fence rails. Diego's hammer dropped to his side. Miss Hattie met Eli's eye, then May's, and gave a small nod that had more to it than words. Amos Pike took one step forward and stopped, swallowed, and kept his place. Eli crossed the yard, finally, and crouched by the granary wall. The glove waited, black studs winking dull in the flat light. He left it where it lay. Beside it, a boot print showed the square bite of hobnails, angled toward the shallow cut that led down behind his place. The way a man might come at dawn if he wanted the house from the blind side. He stood, flexed his right hand until the stiff finger remembered it belonged to him, and looked once at May. "You all right?" She nodded once. "Good," he said. "We'll keep the bar up, and we'll mind the back way." The yard held its breath with him. Somewhere beyond the pasture, a single hairline crack ran through the ice on the stock pond, long and clean, like a line drawn with a cold knife. Dusk came thin and glassy, the kind of light that makes edges sharper than they have a right to be. Eli checked the bar on the back door and set the studded glove where it had fallen, by the granary. Prints around it, clean as writing. He touched 2 fingers to the stove lid, took the heat into his stiff knuckle, and looked at May. Color lived under her skin now. The wool hung loose but honest. "I'll walk a piece with Sam," he said. "Diego, too. Not the well itself." Close enough, May's gaze went to the window, the way a deer looks toward brush that's moved. "He watches the back draw," she said. Then she reached under the edge of the pallet into the torn hem of the burlap he'd cut away, and worked out a small brass key on a string. It was no bigger than the pad of Eli's thumb, teeth thin and mean. "I kept this," she said, "in case I ever got to the door with the right lock." "What door?" She shook her head once. "I don't know which he'll use next. He has a way of making one lock look like another." Eli weighed saying more and let the words die. He nodded toward the hearth. "Hide it where your own hand will find it fast." She pried up a loose flat of stone by the stove apron, set the key under him, and pressed the rock home with her palm. When he turned to go, she caught his sleeve. "One more thing," she said, and moved past him into the lean-to, where harness hung in dark loops. From a strap she worked loose a small tin bell, the kind folks tie on a child's sleigh when the roads go white. Her fingers were clumsy but sure. She stepped into the yard, breath fogging, and tied the bell to the inside latch of the back gate with a scrap of baling twine. It gave a thin, truthful note when she tested it. "He likes dark doors," she said. "Let it tell on him." Eli felt something settle in him that wasn't heat and wasn't pride, just the rightness of a thing that fit its use. "Good," he said. "Keep the hook set on the kitchen door till I knock twice and once." He flexed his right hand until the traitor finger remembered him muscle. "I won't be long." Sam waited where the fence cut toward the draw, a gray shape that could have been a cottonwood if it hadn't breathed. Diego came up from the road with a short-handled shovel across his shoulder, a simple tool that could argue loud if asked. They moved without talk, three shadows keeping to brush, letting the crust bear them where it would. South of Eli's line, the land fell away toward Tate's bottom ground, the big house and with its lights up like a riverboat, proud and blind. Behind the barns, beyond a junk of broken plows, and a ring of dead grass under a tank. A darker square lay under snow, the old well boarded in the dry years and left like a scar. Sam raised his hand and they stopped in the lee of a haystack crusted with ice. He pointed with his chin. "There," he breathed. Moonlight slid over the cap. Someone had driven new nails in a fat, bring bright heads that hadn't learned to rust. A cheap padlock hung where the chain crossed, its shackle dull with thumb worry and newer than everything around it. Snow drifted tight to the boards and left no gaps. Diego set the shovel down and laid a palm on the ground. "Hear that?" he whispered. Eli bent. The cold worked up through his gown coat at the knee. At first there was nothing. Then, faint as a remembered song, a hollow talked back through the boards when the wind leaned on them, an emptiness wrong for a dry well in winter, not echo, not water either, something in between. "Men who shore a well don't wipe locks," Sam said. He pointed at a smudge on the hasp where a glove had polished away frost. "They don't check their back trail every 20 steps. He cut his hand low and they slid farther around, never breaking the clean face of snow between them and the boards. From the angle of the back lot you could see where 3 horses had milled and one had dragged, as if something heavy had swung from its rigging. The wind had worked at the sign, but it hadn't eaten the shape out of it. "Don't touch it," Eli said. He could feel his finger going wooden and curled it into the palm to make it warm. The old words, "I came too late," rose and hit a wall he'd been building all day. "Mark it and leave it for the law." Sam cut a trigon in the bark of a fence post with his knife. 3 short slants stacked neat, then hung a woven twist of grass in the wire just so, a kind of talk a man like Cyrus Bell knew how to read. Diego wedged a broken horseshoe at the base of the corner, heel outward. Sign enough if you were looking. They backed out the way they'd come, stepping where their own steps had already broken the crust. At the edge of town the sheriff's light burned steady behind oiled paper. Cyrus Bell sat with his boots on the rail and a ledger open, pen poised as if words were slow animals he could coax into a corral. He looked up when Eli's shadow blocked the door. "Evening," he said as if the hour had manners. Eli told it straight, with no spice and no trimming. 3 sets of sign, burlap and blood, the well, the lock, the hollow that sounded wrong. Cyrus asked twice and wrote once. When he was done, he set the pen down and rubbed the bridge of his nose, as if winter lived there too. "We'll open it at first light," he said. "I want the whole town able to see what we see." He ticked items off with a square finger. "I'll bring 2 deputies. Diego, if you're nearby, you stand. Miss Hattie will come if God hasn't fetched her elsewhere. As for after, if we put cuffs on a man with friends, they might think to try it on the road." "Powder Plank Bridge," Eli said. Cyrus nodded. "Best way to Buffalo Courthouse when the river's got a shell on it. Best place to bottleneck, too. Wine there cuts a man small. Folks think slow in that cold, and that's when a wagon appears where it shouldn't. We'll set a citizen watch on the bluffs. If it comes to moving him, it'll be with eyes on both banks. He closed the ledger, not like a man shutting a thing away, but like a man fixing a promise closed. You go home, he said. Sit tight. Keep the bar, I'll knock at gray dawn. Eli rode back with the stars brittle over him and the river whispering under its crust. At his place, the yard lay smooth, his own tracks already half remembered by the wind. The glove still sat by the granary, black studs dull as frozen flies. He left it. He could hear the house before he reached it, the small sounds a stove makes when it's fed honest, and a bell note so thin he almost thought he dreamed it. He rounded the corner and saw the back gate. The bell May had tied there shivering once, then quiet. Inside, she was where he'd left her, but her eyes were open and clear. Bell works, she said, almost a smile. It does. He set his hat on the peg and hung his coat. The stiff finger had learned a new trick. It opened without him telling it to. He went to the window and looked south, then west, where the ridge cut the stars. Somewhere out there an owl flapped up from a post and skimmed low over Tate's lot, lifting off the well cap in a panic, leaving a single hair caught on a nail that shone like moon on ice. The night took the rest and held it. Eli rested his palm on the stove, felt the heat bite, and counted the breaths until dawn would let the law see what the dart had tried to keep. Gray came on like a lid lowered over the world. Frost smoked off the fence wire. The knock at Eli's door was 2 and once. Cyrus Bell, right on the dot he'd promised. May was already sitting up, wool dress pulled close, eyes clear in the half-light. You don't have to go, Eli said. I have to see, she answered. Her voice didn't hitch. They walked out into a morning that bit clean. Diego fell in with them at the lane, a deputy's badge glinting cold on Cyrus's coat, the other 2 men behind with a pry bar and coil of rope. Miss Hattie came in her shawl and no apology, chin high, steam rolling off her cups like she'd bullied coffee to stay hot in this weather. Amos Pike trailed at the edge, hat brim low, as if he could tuck under it and vanish. Tate's place sat fat against the river ice, barns squared up like fists. Behind the sheds, the old well wore its ring of new nails, boards scabbed tight, the cheap lock pinched on a chain that had outlived 2 owners. Cyrus put one palm down on the wood and listened like a doctor listening for a lie. All right, he said, let's not waste anybody's winter. The deputy set at the lock with a bar. The first twist took the hasp. The second lifted the lid enough to breathe. Cold air rolled up damp and old. Sam Rivers, already there like he'd grown from the fence line, slid the rope through a loop and nodded. Hold your coats, he said softly. Ground's about. To speak, they raised the cap slow, hands braced, breath smoking. A black mouth gaped, rim iced white. On the second pull of the rope, something brushed wood and stuck. Diego reached with the shovel and levered it to the lip. A boot came up, limp, yellowed with mud that had never seen light. The leather shrunk and buckled. Miss Hattie's hand went to her mouth, but she didn't look away. The next lift brought what nobody needed named, a long bone and the suggestion of a shirt that had once been blue. You could feel the town remember the boy who'd swept store floors and said, "Yes, ma'am," like he meant it. Cyrus didn't sermon it. He took his hat off a heartbeat, then set it back down and looked across the yard where Virgil Tate stood with his coat open, face set like a gate. "Virgil Tate," Cyrus said, voice plain, "you're under arrest on suspicion of murder and anything else this hole cares to lay on the table. Hands where I can see 'em." Virgil worked his jaw. For a heartbeat, a grin came and went. "You going to make a show of this?" he asked. "Law does its work in daylight," Cyrus said. He stepped in, took Virgil's wrist, and turned him to the side. The cuffs clicked in the cold. Small, bright sounds that carried. Virgil flinched when the steel bit. He looked past Cyrus to the cluster of faces. Diego, Miss Hattie, Sam. Amos Pike, who had started to edge backward, stopped with his heel half sunk in a drift. "Don't," Amos said, not sure to whom he spoke. Then louder, gathering himself, "I seen enough." He moved up 2 steps until he was on line with Diego. He kept his eyes on the well. May stood beside Eli. The wind lifted a strand of hair at her temple. Her hands were still, her shoulders square. Virgil's gaze snagged on her and went mean. "You think this ends it?" he said. "You think a lock on a door keeps a man who owns the house from coming in?" "No lock on you now, but the one you wear," Miss Hattie said, "and it suits." Cyrus nodded to the deputies. "Wagon," he said. "We'll hold him at the crossing overnight. At first light we'll take the powder plank to Buffalo Court. I want eyes on both banks. Hattie, you pass among the men who can shoot straight without talking crooked. Sam set posts on the bluffs. If friends mean to be fools, they'll try it at that bridge where the wind knocks sense loose." He looked amonce to Eli. "You keep your door barred. She stays under your roof till we clear the county line. You hear anything that doesn't sound like wind, you light a lamp in that back window and send for me with it." Eli's right hand had gone stiff in the cold. He flexed it inside his coat pocket, the old lock in the trigger finger easing as blood came back. The words that used to rise, "I came too late," showed their faces and then drifted off unwanted as smoke on a clean day. "We'll be ready," he said. They turned then, the small crowd breaking into us one of Tate's hands, stitched ear, eyes narrow as a slit, had been standing by the far shed as if he'd grown there. He peeled away from the line of sight, coat bulging odd on one side, and slid along the back way toward brush. Sam's eyes tracked him without his head moving. He didn't speak it. He didn't have to. The look he sent Eli said the rest. Storm number 2 had just chosen its weather. The deputies walked Virgil past his own porch steps, cuffs shining like cold stars. The bay sidled and blew, not liking the smell that had come out of the ground. May didn't move until the wagon wheels turned. When they did, she let a breath out that made a cloud between her and the day, then let it go. Eli felt the wind find his face and bring him nothing but winter and the sound of metal settling on bone. He set his shoulders to it. The law had planted its boot in the yard. What came next would be men choosing whether to walk around it or try to kick it free. Dawn came low and raw, a gray that tasted of iron. Frost wired the weeds. The yard held its breath, waiting to see which way the day would lean. Eli checked the back door bar, touched the stove for heat, and watched the window darken with his own breath and clear again. May stood by the table, rolling the tin cup between her palms like it was a prayer wheel. "He'll try the back way," she said. "He always liked the door no one looked at." "Then we'll look," Eli said. Somewhere out by the draw, a jay scolded itself hoarse. The world went still after. Then the bell on the back gate gave a small true note, and another after it. Once, twice, like a finger tapped a glass. May's eyes found Eli's. No words. He tipped his head, and she slipped behind the chimney where the wall thickened. Eli lifted the rifle from the pegs by habit, and felt the cold lay its teeth along his trigger finger. He breathed on that hand and set his knuckles along the stock until heat came back in small bites. Not late, not today. He eased the door open. The fog that sometimes crawls up from winter water had slid thin over the yard, a breath, a veil. Out of it came a man's outline, coat big on the right, where it hid what it hid. He had a way of moving that tried to make quiet shout. Hobnails clicked once on the stone step and then remembered themselves. He put a hand to the back gate, bell chimed, honest as a witness, and the man flinched, teeth bared. The black gelding tied to the rail, stamped and tossed, already sour. The man cursed soft, swung a leg up, and put weight to the stirrup. May's work the night before lived in that leather. The cinch was there, but short of honest tight. As he stood up, the saddle rolled with him like a bad idea. He clawed for horn and air at the same time, slipped clean, and hit hard on his side. A short knife winked out of his coat and skittered under the trough. The pistol under his arm printed the cloth, then showed metal at the seam. "Hold," Eli said, voice flat as a board. The man jerked a shoulder and got his hand to the pistol. Eli didn't wait for regret. He sent one round high, snapping a dead twig off the cottonwood above the man's head. The crack folded the fog and set it jumping. The gelding blew and pulled, eyes white. The man came up bent, gun half free. "Don't," Eli told him, and stepped down from the stoop so the man could see the plain of it in his face. His finger didn't lie to him this time. It held true. A scrape of iron sounded from the side yard. Diego Morales slid into the fog-strew edge with a short-handled shovel, steel bright as a promise. He didn't wave it. He just held it like a man holds any honest tool. On the chicken house roof, a shape straightened. Sam Rivers, blanket dark, eyes level. "Drop it," Sam said, not loud. The word went out and hung there like a nail. The man's eyes jumped between them and found no soft ground. He jerked the pistol free anyway, a twitch more, then a choice. Eli lowered the muzzle a thumb's width and put a second shot into the frozen dirt. A hand span from the man's boot. The clod that jumped smacked the man's shin. He sucked breath and stumbled. Diego eased forward one pace, shovel head turned edge on. "Don't make me dig today," he said. The bell on the gate rang again. 2 and 1. Cyrus Bell stepped through with a deputy on his hip, both men fogged and steady. "That'll do," the sheriff said. "Let's keep everybody's breakfast down where it belongs." His deputy's revolver watched while his own hands went to the stranger's wrist. The man thought about it hard, then let the thinking go. Cyrus spun him, took the elbow high, and the pistol clattered out to where the frost could cool it. The cuffs sang their little song. It was not a long song, but it carried. "Name," Cyrus said. The man kept his mouth as tight as his eyes. "Fine," Cyrus said. "We'll write you down as can't recall until memory returns." He looked at Eli's roofline, at Sam, at Diego's shovel, then to May, who had stepped just enough out from the chimney to be counted. "Anybody hurt?" "No," Eli said. The man breathed through his teeth, then spat red. Where his cheek had kissed the trough's rim, it had split a line. Blood made a narrow trickle over the lip and into clean snow, a scratch of color that looked like writing you didn't need to read twice. Cyrus towed the studded glove still lying where it had fallen yesterday, by the granary. "Your size?" he asked the cuffed man. Silence. "Bag it," Cyrus told the deputy. "He'll find his tongue when Steele and a judge share a room." He nodded to May. "Your bell earns wages." To Eli, "We move the prisoner train at first light proper. I'll put 2 men on the bluffs above Powder Bridge and 3 below. Wind'll get mean. Men think slow in that. I prefer being stubborn over being quick." "Stubborn suits winter," Eli said. Cyrus looked to the black gelding, saddle still canted, and cinch hanging shamefaced. "Someone planned for that," he said, not asking. May didn't answer, and he didn't make her. He just touched his hat brim, the way a man does to a person who has done hard thinking. They walked the cuffed man past the gate that had told on him. Sam climbed down off the roof without a sound and picked the knife from under the trough with 2 fingers, dropped it into the deputy's sack. Diego set the shovel against the wall and knocked his boots twice, like closing a book. Fog began to thin. The yard showed itself again in pieces, the path to the granary, the blunt prints where the man had fallen, the fine high line in the snow where the bullet had smacked dirt. Eli lowered the rifle and felt his right hand open easy. No fight in the finger. The old words rose, "I came too late," and found no hook to hang on. May stepped to the rail and laid a palm on the black's neck. The horse blew, and settled. "Easy," she said, not to the animal alone. The bell at the gate gave one last sleepy tremble and then lay quiet. The day would move now. The law had a wagon to load and a road to mind. The rest of them had doors to bar and stoves to feed and a bridge of cold boards to think about. The thin red line in the snow gleamed once, then took the frost and dimmed to iron, a mark that said what it needed and no more. By noon the air had a glass edge to it, clouds thinned to gauze, letting a chalk sun through. Cyrus ran a rope block and 2 men down the old well again, careful and slow, while the rest of us stood with our boots set where we could see. The first haul brought up shards of shirt and a belt buckle bent like a question. The second brought a knife sealed in mud. Diego rinsed it with snow and held it flat on his palm. The bone handle had letters cut shallow. K.i.l., not fancy, just a boy's work with a nail and time. Miss Hattie said, "Oh, Jessie," soft, and steadied herself with a breath that smoked white and broke. The next pull came up light as a bird's nest, a coil of hair tie, leather dark with damp, a few hairs still caught, in the twist. Cyrus didn't touch either piece barehanded. He opened a flour sack he'd turned clean and new, slid knife and tie inside, then wrote the hour and place on a scrap and tied it to the drawstring. "Evidence," he said, not to brag but to mark the ground. May stood straight beside Eli, chin level. She didn't step back. "That's mine," she said of the tie, her voice held. "He used it for my wrists." Nobody told her not to say it. It wasn't the sort of thing that ought to live only in a head. Cyrus nodded once, the way a man closes a door gentle when the room is full. "You'll tell it again for the judge," he said. He put the sack in a wooden crate he'd lined with clean burlap, then set the studded glove we'd bagged that morning beside it. "Sam, get me that statement on the hobnails. Distance, angle, anything your bones remember." Sam's pencil wrote like tracks across a creek bed, spare and straight. "Hobnail square, man favors the right. A hitch in the left knee," he said, voice even. He signed with a small mark, only he used. Amos Pike came up from the lane with his hat in both hands and a sheet torn from a ledger. He didn't look at Virgil. He looked at Cyrus like a man finally telling the truth to himself. "Found this at Hattie's when she let me check work slips," he said. "Jesse's name?" "Wages crossed out for the last 2 weeks before he went missing. No mark of pay." "I should have asked before. I'm asking now." "You're speaking now," Miss Hattie said. She reached into her basket and started passing tin cups around as if the whole town had a fever she could break. The coffee near took the skin off your mouth. Behind her came 2 farm wives with shawls tied tight and pencils tucked behind their ears. "We'll witness. One of my other's fault," them said. "Put our names where they can be read." Cyrus slid Amos's sheet into the crate, wrote another tag, then closed the lid halfway with his palm. "This goes to Buffalo in my wagon," he said. "My hand to the clerk's hand." No stop for talk between. "If someone figures to lighten my load at Powder Bridge, they'll meet neighbors on the bluffs who can tell wind from foolishness." Diego rested the shovel against his shoulder, eyes on May. "You want a chair?" "I'll stand," she said. Her mouth was pale, but there was set to it. Eli felt his right hand open and stay open without coaxing. The joint that winter liked to steal had warmed by use and heat and something else that didn't have a name. Not late, the mind said, and for once there was nothing in him to argue back. Cyrus took statements, short, clean, no embroidery. He had Miss Hattie read what he'd written, then lean her name into the page like a fence post. Amos signed, his hand shaking, and then finding a line, Sam's paper went into the crate. Diego's account set beside it. He printed slow letters square as his forge bricks. When the rope finally came up with nothing but a wet smell and a last handful of silt, Cyrus looked into the hole a long breath, then nodded to the deputies. Lit it. Seal it. This ground will sleep like we do, eyes shut, but not forgetting. They set the boards back and drove the nails home. Not the bright wrong ones someone else had used, but old square nails from Diego's bucket, hammered flat so no hand would find easy purchase. A wind feathered in from the river. Fine snow began to sift, no fuss, just steady, laying a thin white skin over the fresh boards and the scuffed ring where men had stood and looked. It covered the rope scars, the prints, the iron scuffs, and made a lid the color of quiet. The crate rode up on Cyrus's wagon, wedged tight with a coil of chain and his spare coat. He tied the tailboard himself and tugged it once to be sure. "Bridge in the morning," he said. "If anybody means to be brave, pick a place high and out of the wind. Bring patience. We'll need more of that than bullets." Miss Hattie touched May's arm the way a person sets a cup down, sure and gentle. "You come warm yourself," she said. "There's beef and bread enough to share." Later, May said, she looked toward Eli's place. "I've got a skittish colt that needs to learn a hammer doesn't end the world." "That it doesn't," Diego said, mouth almost smiling. We turned our horses and our boots toward our chores. The new snow took our tracks even as we made them. Behind us, the well sat sealed under a clean white lid. It didn't hide what had been found. It only kept the weather off while the rest of it went where it belonged. Into a book, into the hands of the court, into the part of a town where forgetting dies and remembering builds a spine. Snow fell, the way ash settles after a hard burn, fine, steady, no hurry. Morning cracked and then softened. The wind backed off to let men hear small things. Eli fed the stove slow and even, learning the tick that meant enough, the pop that meant wait. Heat pushed the chill out of the corners until the iron purred like a big cat. He wrapped both hands around a tin cup. The stiff finger that winter favored eased on its own. No coaxing. The ache had a new edge to it, less a bite than a memory. Out in the lot, the colt blew white steam and threw its head at every sound. He was leggy and unsure, the kind of raw-boned sorrel that wants to be brave and can't yet find the handle. May stood just inside his world, coat rope-belted, wool dress showing at the hem. She held a slice of apple in an open palm and spoke low enough to be part of the air. "Easy now. It's a hammer, not thunder." Diego came up the lane with a tool roll and a sack slung to his back. "Hinge," he said by way of hello, lifting the roll. "Door of yours sings like a coyote. Wind has a way of following a song." He shouldered past Eli into the lean-to, set a wedge, and made the first tap. Metal rang. The colt snorted and danced sideways, shoulder bumping the rail. May didn't reach. She let the fear run, counted one breath, then another, then offered the apple again. The horse leaned, took it, chewed loud. Diego tapped once more, twice. "World's noisy," he said without looking up. "Might as well teach a thing to stand in it." Eli carried out a second apple and laid it in May's palm without touching her. "He listens better than some," he said. "Some days that'll be me," she answered, eyes on the horse. "You'll have to offer twice." Miss Hattie's wagon rattled in, now wheels wrapped with burlap to save the yard. She set a black pot on the step and a note under a chipped saucer. Her scarf was bright as a painted barn. "Stew," she announced. "Everybody gets a spoon." Nobody argues with a woman holding a ladle. She turned and went before gratitude could find words. Eli read the note, 2 lines about keeping strong and a third that said I seen worse turned right by folks minding one another, and set the pot near the stove where it would hold. He poured a cup and took it to the grave behind the cottonwoods where the ground rose just enough to keep a man's feet dry. The carved board had held through 6 winters. The winter after had taken the edges off the name, but not the shape. He stood a moment because anything less would have been wrong. When he came back, May was at the fence letting the colt breathe her sleeve. She smelled like wood smoke and sheep tallow and cold air. Diego wrapped the last hinge pin home and leaned his shoulder into the door. The squeal died like a bad habit. "There," he said. "Now the north wind's got to knock like the rest of us." He took a spoon from the pot without asking, blew once, and nodded, approval at Miss Hattie's work. "You'll want salt," he said, "and patience. Bridge roads tomorrow. Cyrus will want men on the bluffs who can hold still longer than their toes want to." "I'll go," Eli said. Diego looked at May and then at Eli like a man checking loads on a wagon before a hill. "You'll both do," he said, not meaning guns. The colt shied when the door shut with its new solid sound. May stood her place and let the fright pass. "Good," she said. Her voice found a level, quiet and straight. "Try again." She offered another apple slice. The horse touched her wrist with a damp, soft muzzle and stayed. She let her hand lift to the pole and rest there, weight no heavier than a fly. "There you go," she told the animal, and something uncoiled in her shoulders that had lived there too long. Eli watched the way her breath steadied the sorrels. He felt his own hand settle, the finger notching into a place on the cup where heat fed it slow. The words that used to come, "I came too late," rose, looked around a room where they weren't needed, and went quiet. "You eat," he said, "then we'll walk the fence. I've got a place where the wire lifts in wind, been meaning to fix it since fall." They ate on the step because food tastes different outdoors. Steam rose in simple lines and broke on the cold. Diego told a story about a mule that taught itself to open gates and took paying customers for rides until the sheriff put it on the county books as an employee. May smiled the smallest smile at the corner and then let it go. Even that little shift looked like a new stake driven where fence had sagged. After, Eli and May took the north line with a hammer and a pocketful of staples. The snow squeaked under their boots. A crow wheeled and scolded the world on general principle. At the bad place, Eli pulled the wire tight with both hands, the meat of his palm burning, the stubborn finger holding. May stood with her boot heel bracing the post and the hammer ready. "When I say," he told her. He said, she hit. The staple bit cedar and didn't bend. They did 3 more like that. It was work that asked you to do it right the first time and didn't mind telling you when you didn't. "Folks keep telling me I break what's near me," May said, eyes on the staples she'd set. "Maybe that's true." "Folks also say winter lasts forever," Eli said. "They're wrong about that too." By mid-afternoon, the colt would take the halter and walk 2 steps without trying to climb out of his own skin. Diego swung back by with a strip of leather he'd cut down to fit the cinch right, and he checked the stitching like a man shaking a friend's hand. "Not today," he told the saddle. "You'll sit straight, or I'll speak with you." Toward sundown, Miss Hattie's stew had given up its best, and the pot showed iron at the bottom. Eli washed it and left it on the step, with a "thank you" scrawled on brown paper. The wind made a small moo and thought better of it. The yard held the quiet kind of ready you get before a team leans into the first inch of a heavy pull. May disappeared around the cottonwoods and came back with a single dried bloom she'd found at the lee of a stone. Summer's ghost held together by luck and weather. She walked to the grave and set it straight into the rim of snow on top, not poked through to dirt, just set like a token. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Eli stood with his hat in his hands and watched a while, then put the hat back on and drew the bar at the back door because some things are habit and some are hope, and sometimes they're the same. In the last light, the colt put its chin on May's shoulder and stayed there, breathing into her scarf like he meant to wear the same air. The stove inside ticked and settled. A hinge no longer sang. Down on the river, ice talked in long, low notes. A man heard with his bones more than his ears. "Tomorrow," Eli said. "Tomorrow," May answered. Horse breath smoked. The day thinned to blue. 2 tin cups stood on the step, cooling side by side, empty and clean, catching the first pricks of starlight like they had business being there. On the grave, the small dry flower stood straight, a quiet thing with more to say than most talking does. Dawn took the edge off the cold and left it honest. The river spoke under its shell, a hollow knocking that said it hadn't forgotten how to move. Cyrus rolled his wagon to the lane with Virgil in irons, 2 deputies riding flank, and a citizen guard strung thin across the bluffs, men with coffee in them and frost in their mustaches. Diego stood at the bridge head with his sleeves rolled, as if he could arm wrestle the wind. Sam Rivers set his blanket just so and watched the cottonwoods for any thought of motion. Miss Hattie passed tin cups along the line like a chaplain at a trench. "Slow," Cyrus said. "Ice holds best when a man's pride weighs least." They took the powder plank bridge, step by step. Boards creaked, but not in complaint. Wind came hard along the flats and tried to turn men into sticks. It found little to work with. On the far bank, a willow broke and tapped the water. That was the only loose thing that morning. The rest held. Halfway across, a rider showed on the bend above. Coat flared, hat pulled to ghost his face. He took in the guard on the bluffs, the rifles held low and ready, and he turned plain as a weather vane. The horses' tracks wrote their short story up a draw and into scrub. Nobody went after. Cyrus kept the wagon between the rails, irons bright as teeth. When the wheel rolled onto hard ground and stayed there, men let breath out they hadn't known they'd held. "Buffalo by noon," Cyrus said. He lifted a hand without flourish. The line of neighbors thinned into men with chores again. They would tell the story different when it reached their kitchens, but the bones of it would stay. The well, the cuffs, the bridge that didn't break. By noon, a paper sat tacked to Hattie's door with a square nail. "County Court, Buffalo, date set." The letters were big enough to reach a man at the hitch rail. Amos Pike read it twice, and then stood a long time as if something small in him had lined up with something larger in the world. Snow shined clean for 2 days. Then it lost its salt. Sun worked the banks thin, showed grass the color of old rope in rings along fence posts and south-facing mounds. The river quit knocking and began to chuckle low. Boots went from biting to wet. Eli put his foot wrong once and took water in above the ankle. He didn't curse. Coal that gets inside leather teaches faster than talk. May rose with the light and checked the colt. He came to her hand now and carried his fear like a man carries a pocket knife, there if needed, but not a thing to wave. She cinched the saddle snug with the strip Diego had cut, checked the latigo twice because tomorrow fingers forget what today taught. "You ready?" she asked the horse. It wasn't foolishness, the right ear tipped back. He was. Eli set coffee on the stove and listened to it mutter while he looked at the paper on the wall, a notice in Cyrus's hand asking 2 names for testimony when a judge wore black and folks had to say things with their whole mouths. He traced the edges of the paper with his eyes and then let it be. Outside the back door, the hinge stayed quiet. He touched it anyway, the way a man touches a shoulder in passing, habit turning into comfort. They walked the pasture where the snow had pulled back into patched quilts. Meadowlarks tried a note and surprised themselves. The colt shouldered into May, not to push, but to measure. She laughed into her scarf, the sound small but new. Eli watched the way her boots stepped as if the ground might allow it. "Bridge held," he said. "Men held it," she answered. He saddled up the sorrel and kept a slow circle, while May took the colt a short jog along the first brown ring of ground. The animal tossed once, then found a rhythm. May's hands were light but fixed. Sun hit her cheek and showed color there that hadn't come from pain. She turned at the cottonwood and came back easy, breathing even. Again, she said, and did it again. Toward afternoon, Diego stumped in with a scrap of leather he'd oiled and a nail bag for nothing in particular. He eyed the colt's cinch like a proud uncle. "That'll do," he said. Sam came up the fence line at a pace that never hurried and never came late. "Tracks say Tate's hands are thinning," he said. "Men go where wages don't come with iron." Miss Hattie sent a smaller pot this time, with a note that said only, "Tomorrow I'll want the pot back." There was comfort in a chore sat that plain. Eli warmed the stew anyway, and the pot came home clean, as if that were part of the law. The day leaned west. Down by the river the ice turned glass where current slid under it. Cottonwoods showed catkins you couldn't see unless you thought to. Eli and May walked out to the grave. The dried flower leaned a little from thaw, but it still stood. May nudged it straight with 2 fingers. Her hand hesitated, then stayed on the snow a breath longer, not to say anything, just to be there. They sat the step in the last light. 2 ammal mugs steamed between their knees. The colt hung his head over the rail and chewed nothing, content to make the sound anyway. The wind had lost its knife and kept only its hand. "You can go when you want," Eli said. It was not pressure. It was permission, the real kind. "I know," May said. She looked past the cottonwoods toward the road that would dry first. "Today I'll stay." He nodded and didn't make more of it. He took his cup in his right hand and felt the finger sit where it should, without complaint. A thought rose. I came too late and had nowhere to land. It dissolved like breath on warm iron. From town, the hammer at Diego's shop rang twice, testing more than announcing. Somewhere beyond, a coyote told the evening to end itself. The river sounded like somebody smiling with their mouth closed. Eli watched the steam off their cups drift and knit, then pull apart and join again. "This time," he said, not loud, not for proof. "This time I got there in time." May didn't answer with words. She leaned her shoulder until it found his and left it there. The colt blew, easy and close. The door behind them didn't sing. The air held the clean damp of snow, thinking about being water. 2 mugs simped between them on the step, letting off what heat they had, not in a hurry. The country around was still itself, hard where it had always been hard, soft in the places it remembered how, yet it felt different for being seen and stood in. That was enough. Snow doesn't keep its shape, and neither do we. If this trail sat with you, if the bell, the well, and the colt stuck, tell me. Drop 0 if you felt the cold ease, 1 if you stayed for the quiet justice. Hit subscribe, ride with us, and I'll keep a fresh story warming on the stove.